I also thank him for making the joy so clear, but also these strange contradiction in the situation, which we should not forget. There were some who referred to not long after the change of the political system in those years. I recall Ralph Dahrendorf's much quoted saying, according to which a political system can be changed in 6 months, an economic system can be changed in 6 years, but in truth, a society can only be changed in perhaps 60 years. And thus, my first question goes to Balázs Orbán about responsibility. I will try to smear the responsibility to you. Why is that so? But it's not really about that. But indeed, as a representative of a generation which has not lived through these years, as a responsible member of such a government, or rather in a strategic position as an official where the policy of remembrance has a very great importance, how do you see the 60 years, which was mentioned by Ralph Dahrendorf? Well, it's more or less in harmony, but could we accelerate this process? What can we do at all in order to eliminate those contradictions about which Hubertus Knabe spoke, that they should not be part and parcel of our everyday life? First of all, may I greet everyone with much affection. I am pleased and happy to be here, and I am also very happy that this role was given to me, that I can be the young piglet in this conference. This role I am happy to fulfill. The age is not a merit, but rather a condition that is passing. So I hope that in a few decades from now, this will change. At the same time, I'm quite pleased and happy to meet this request, inasmuch as by the end of the 1980s or early 1990s, I was just trying to walk, eat, and to be house-trained. So on a family basis, I still have contacts to the previous system and its terrible facts. At a very young age, I was confronted that particular family story and tragedy, which otherwise only confirmed my family, that my grandmother spent 4.5 years in jail of the Rákosi Stalinist system for political reasons, simply because she believed in free love and fall in love with an American citizen, and so that she was declared a U.S. spy, and she has spent 4.5 years in a construed trial created by communist lies in that very building where our chief director, Madame Schmidt, is running the Museum of Terror House. So I have a family experience too. At the same time, I do feel the responsibility that I ought to say something on behalf of the young generation. And here, Herr Knabe gave us a rather pessimistic picture. And I think the two sentences he said, that on the one hand, the people as a rule are not happy to deal with history, and this was aimed more at the young generation. The young people explicitly dislike this particular topic, and they explicitly have slogans, expressions, terms, and demands formulated, which, if someone knows history well, are familiar to them from an age which we do not want to come back again at all. I personally, and perhaps this is coming from my youth, but I am optimistic, so I'm not a pessimist as opposed to him. And I think that our generation, at least the generation which, or those members who were willing and are willing to deal with the public life, and they undertake position in the public life, are not ungrateful, are not silly, and not forgetting, but they are simply grateful for the freedom, and they can give thanks to those who fought for this freedom. And I made a list while the ministers and professors spoke. I gleaned out 6 lessons to learn for my generation, getting the morals of it, which can be considered as ours, as young, at least we Hungarians, and not everyone will belong to the generation, but those who belong to the conservative right, Christian in Hungary, would at a minimum learn from the previous, on the previous system and from the experience of the past 30 years. 6 morals. First, in everyday lives, there are a lot of information coming to us, a lot of stimuli, and also different opinions, and it's very difficult to make ends meet in this, and in particular with the young people, because they have compasses that would help them to find their way. But, and it is a great but, in the end, if you take a step back, and if you purify and take off this noise which we are hit by every day, then between truth and lie, it's easy to make a difference. We can, and it's easy to make a difference, and the truth and lies are always separated from each other, and that is why it could not ever function, neither before 1950 or after 1956, the propaganda activity of the communist system, because they were built on lies, and everybody knew that they simply were not true or right, what was said in the propaganda. Quite simply, people did not believe it. And I think it is true now, too. It's easy if there are too many, and they are very strong, and they use a very great force in saying what they say, but we Hungarians have a feel, and we can quite easily find our way between truth and lie. So it's not a negative feature what was left to us, but rather a positive one, which is consequence of the communist oppression. And the other thing is, coming from this, they are easy to make differences between freedom and oppression. So in this respect, I think we can say that we are one of the specialists, and if we are asked, we are always very happy to give advice with great respect to other nations, but we ourselves can differentiate between freedom and oppression, and we also know how was it to live in oppression, what are the operating mechanisms of this, what does this mean to everyday life, and we think that even for the time being, or rather in the past 30 years, we have been living freely, and we are proud of this freedom, and the way we do it, Hungarians, that's how you must live freely in this Europe of the 21st century. And the third thing attached to this, but somehow can be taken out from this, is that peace and freedom and security are not a given, are not givens. So as soon as I was born, ever since there is a constitutional statehood, freedom, stability, and peace, putting the confusing first few years in parentheses. So live in freedom and peace. Or if I start from my personal experience, I could think that this could not be otherwise. This would not happen otherwise. It cannot be changed. Yet, as we try to pay attention to what is the message of the period of the political change and the previous communist period, thus we know, I hope, that peace is not given for free. You must always fight for it. I also teach political philosophy to some students, and in our lesson yesterday, I recall the famous fresco of Ambrogio Lorenzetti from the City Hall of Florence about the good and bad government, the allegories, which is a very famous fresco, and here the allegory of good governance. On 2 sections or 2 parts of the fresco, we see peace, which otherwise is a nice young lady, pretty lady in white, and on the scene, and she's lying on a couch. But so that peace in good government could lie on a couch, not to do for that, every other merit has to be working, such as bravery, such as cleverness, such as cunning, such as unity, such as science. So all in all, so that peace could lie at ease, but could be present, to that each and every other good features and the idea of good governance must be there, or else we come to a great, great problem. And if peace is lost, everything is lost. The fourth point is that unity is a rare gift. Perhaps it's strange that I, as a young person, speak so realistically, but we Hungarians can accept this more easily because we are still a fighting and debating type of nation, which is only capable to be united in critical periods and to work and think together. Such a critical period was 1956, and such a critical period was 1989, 1990. But these are rare moments. Unity is a rare gift which we have to appreciate. But if there is no such special condition, then the political struggle will become a definitive feature of the gray everydays, as it were. Now the problem comes when the political fight in every day and the various opinions coming from that, plurality, conflicts, do not emerge in the scene. Then there is dictatorship and there is no freedom, and we don't want that back at all. The fifth is a European lesson to learn, that is, Europe cannot be divided artificially. It was tried several times in the 20th century in more ways than one, but it never succeeded. Europe is an organic unit which belongs together. For the Hungarians, it is encoded in ourselves that we should be considering ourselves as parts of Europe, but to organize Europe into empires is also impossible, and those, even with the best of intent, try, let it be a Marxist communist or a National Socialist or the Napoleonic ideal and logic. But anybody who tries to reorganize Europe into empires will fail. It will never succeed because Europe is a Europe of nations, and the nations are those who are in charge of Europe's future and security. And last sixth point I put on is what John O'Sullivan referred to in his introduction, that history has no end to it, and anyway, as a conservative, I think it doesn't even have a direction, no trend. The trend is what we set forth for it, and we came to a period when it's not about following the model, but rather to create the model. Hungary thinks the new Europe can be successful if we find the recipe for the successful new Europe, and Hungary can be successful if we find the prescription of Hungarian success and we apply it properly. And these are connected at certain points inevitably, and in certain points they may be confronting each other, but there is no problem with this because we all know that the European Union slogan is, which is not very often quoted these days, but we quote it quite often, but forget one part of it, that the unity in a multicolored society. So thank you very much for being with us, that we remember together, and we hope that these remembrances and series of remembering meetings, the news and the effect of this will increasingly be integrated in the consciousness of the Hungarian society, and the young generation and its picture of the present and the future will be defined by this. I will try to do my best as far as I can by my humble tools. Thank you very much.
Thank you for these thoughts that apply to the future as well. But let me get back to the past with regard to what Mr. Orbán was talking about, the relationship of truth and lies with regard to the communist system and with regard to the processing of it. The past local government election period, a lot was told about pornography, but wasn't this a kind of part of political pornography when back in 1994 the Hungarian nation, Hungarian people re-elected those people who they had sent away some years before? So the question is to Imre, what was your take of those events? So there was a changeover of the regime, and there was this heroism and that moral capital and the commitment to truth. And then the decision of the Hungarian people in the fall of, in the autumn, in the spring of 1944. What can you say about that? I tell you quite honestly that the big disappointment was not something that we perceived in 1994, but right immediately after the government was formed. So we perceived, this is how it was expressed by György Szabad, that the opposition roundtable at the time now got into, and the parties of it now got into the parliament. And we did not perceive it as that there's a government side, because we became the government side, and the other part, the opposition, and these two will be fiercely fighting against each other. No, Szabad György said that we are the opposition that took power, and the others are the opposition that got into the opposition, because that opposition attitude that's given in a democracy, it is a completely different oppositionist attitude than the opposition in a party state was. So we felt that, of course, what Mr. Balázs Orbán told is quite natural, that there's no unity in a democracy. It is quite obvious. You have to challenge things. You have to debate. There's so many various subjects and ideas. But in the basic and fundamental things, everybody has to agree. In the basic and national things, everybody has to agree. I would like to share with you this in a more subjective way, because it was the national sentiment that took me to politics. Already at the time when my mind started to grow or be open, I went to Rózsák tere in the 7th district to the mass, to the service at 12 o'clock, and not to the students' service, to the church, but because at 12 o'clock when I went there, the national anthem was always sung. And I will never forget that in the People's Stadium, which was the forerunner of the Puskás Stadium, now it is such a big upheaval that at that now we build a stadium for 63,000 people. You know, at that time, in that stadium, there were 98,000 people viewing the Hungarian national team's matches, all wearing the national colors and waving national flags. So this was the reason why I was going out to football matches, because quite early, when I started to think of what I should do, I was about 6 or 7 years old, because I was a bit older at the beginning of the changeover regime than you were, Balázs. So I thought that, okay, by all means, I should do more than my personal interests. I should do more than my family's interests. I did not think that I will stand up for the whole mankind, for the whole universe, but the nation, the community, which is still quite near to be tangible, and still is much more than just myself and the family. Well, this is what took me to politics. And this was my feeling, and I thought that here people can live freely these national sentiments, because actually the Germans had completely different feelings about that following the Second World War, because the 10-year-long Nazi system's dictatorship was not followed by another oppression. I'm talking about the West. Nor did another oppressor follow, but in Hungary, one foreign oppressor the short-timed German occupation was replaced by a Soviet, the Russian oppression, which lasted for 40 years. And I thought that if, and this was quite properly characterized by Sándor Csóri, that the arrow wings bad, terrible period started for 1 year. He said that after the National Socialism's 1 year, the un-national socialism decades followed. This was not so typical in each and every socialist country, though. There were some people where the national sentiments were advocated. This kind of socialism, it was un-national here. And I thought that if people can live freely their freedom, they can exercise their national sentiments, they will tolerate all those difficulties that because we knew that changes will bring about some tremendous difficulties. So such difficulties will be tolerated. That were caused by the 40 years of communism. So, and we also thought that they will blame it on us, but we never thought that a couple of months after the change of the government, a blockade of the taxi drivers will start. And in the first days of the cab drivers' blockade, even the simple people in the street, instead of their freely elected national government, were actually helping the cab drivers, and elderly ladies were taking tea to the cab drivers out in the street and encouraging them to go on the strike. And I went to the hospital to see Antal József, and he said that, yeah, I thought that we have a nation. And this was actually the time when we were quite shocked to see this illusion. And so it happened much earlier, not only in 1994. But I can tell you that this government alone, among all the socialists, all the other socialist countries, served its tenure. The first government never fell. It simply lost the elections, but it was not brought down. And the fact that they lost the election from the very first moment, it was Antal József said that this was a kamikaze government, but actually still hoped that there will be no loss of the election, but still it was obvious when we look into ourselves. Probably not in the first moment. In the first moment, actually, it was the way the opposition behaved. That was something that shocked us, and the second big shock was the cab driver strike. So then we realized that, yes, the first 4 years is not going to be easy, and we thought that chances are that after that it won't be those opposition people who will follow, who were so much against us, but on the contrary, the communists will come back. And so this was the reality we thought. It was back in 1994. So slowly we come to the end of our time, but I would like to get back to what Hubertus Knabe recalled in the second part of what he was saying when it comes to his skepticism and sense of reality. My question with regard to this is that how is that possible? How can one explain in the German public life, and we probably owe this to the Hungarian communists, that after the hardness of the 1980s was completely different than it was in Hungary. So how is it possible that this amnesty was brought into German public life so quickly? How is that possible that Gregor Gysi, about whom everyone knew what kind of role he played in the party state, already at the beginning of the 1990s onwards, he was the star of all kinds of talk shows on television. How is that possible? And this is, again, the latest news that even the German Christian Democrats told it now, a couple of weeks ago, that the GDR can be called a dictatorship. And it wasn't only an Unrecht Staat. So what was the reason why this coming to terms, although there were Gauckbehörde and all kind of other things, still in the public life, this was still this permissive way of behavior?
Dear Mr. Prühle, let me just answer this out of hand. It is difficult to answer to this. Let me start by pointing out that in Germany, the leftist dictatorship is always appreciated better than the rightist. It was always true in the history of the Bundesrepublik Deutschland. Perhaps that's one of the after effects of National Socialism. I don't know, I don't know how to put this, Mr. Ambassador, but in a negative sense, a national pride and its impact that we want to be world champions, even in crime. I don't know. But anyway, it is obvious that the left dictatorships are better approved than that of the right. And that was true before the fall of the Berlin Wall. So returning and glancing our eyes back, because it's extended to the GDR times as well, but it was always there, I'm sure. Not so long ago, I've written a text which started with a sentence that history does not repeat itself, one says. In the meantime, I must put some doubt to this, because I lived to see when the socialism was criticized, those who did do this are considered right-wing, and those who describe the GDR as it was, then they would brand him as non-objective. So I visited research days on the GDR in Western Germany, and I recall well that each and every merited scientist came to the conclusion that the GDR was the 10th strongest industrial country in the world. That's what they said about it, and the GDR and the German Federal Republic of Germany are becoming similar because they are industrial societies, and eventually, and almost automatically, the two will be united. And there was also a theory which said that GDR could only be criticized immanently, that was dogmatically manifested at that time, so only that thing could be criticized, which was in contradiction with their own objectives and arguments, but it would not create on the base of common sense or income. That was the immanent method of criticizing, measuring this thing by itself. And these things are revitalized now. And if we start asking ourselves whether the left-wing dictatorships are more popular than those on the right and why they have more appreciation in them, then naturally this is correlating with the leftist ideologies and their qualities as well. The Nazi ideology, that is, we are the stronger and the more powerful, and the more strong enforces his will. It's a kind of special top Darwinism, social Darwinism. And for people who are not the strongest, perhaps it's not very attractive, but the ideology that we promise you that we shall create a paradise on earth, and you don't have to wait until heaven is there so that we could create equality, in social respect or in social policy, well, the individuals are concerns and their wish for profit, and all this confronted many people that could be finding benevolent support, if I want to put it very carefully. And at this point, the intellectual circles in Germany have a very good tradition of this. Ever since the 1960s, this has been so that many from those who are now creating the tone in Germany, that is the earlier Minister of Foreign Affairs, Joschka Fischer, or Kretschmer, Prime Minister of Baden-Württemberg, they were leftist quite clearly and extremely to that, and that's true for quite a few journalists, university lecturers, teachers, and so on and so forth. And that this would happen, one takes one's political stance at a young age, and they will stay so in most of the cases. And the renegades are meaning an exception. So practically, people simply think by feel. They just say from the top of their head that the left ideas and socialism are not synonyms to system-crushing legality. And socialism, many people have a glinting eye. They consider it a positive utopia, everything that has happened notwithstanding. And indeed, one last consideration which might play a role in this is that in this age and time, among the elite, the opinion-forming elite, making accounts of communism, there was a very strong agreement. We should not be too rigid, too strong. The Eastern elite was not interested in trying to the blocked party, because it was not a single party, so there was a CDU as well. So they might have come into difficulty that charging themselves. So there was a prime minister in the 1960s. So the Eastern elite was not really interested to be confronted with that, and not even the Western elite was, not only the intellectuals, but also the politicians primarily, because they were sick, friends in thick and thin of this. So the SPD party leader was a person named Beatrice Honecker, and Gerhard Schröder's letter was in my office. He wrote a written letter to Egon Krenz, Honecker's successor. Dear Egon, I wish you a lot of success for the elections. I thought, what kind of election would he think about a German person in Eastern Germany? It's not so simple, my job, he said in the letter, but all the best with friendship, Gerhard. So it was basically indecent making friends thus, and after 1989, people may commit errors and mistakes. We can all make mistakes, only those don't make mistakes who don't do anything. But in the wake of 1989, they were not confronted with that on a critical plane. That is the very thing which, again, fertilized this core. The Greens in 1990 started in the election fight, and in their poster was everyone speaking about Germany. We speak about the weather. Even it's very topical today, but nobody was interested then. But by and by, they were voted out from the federal parliament. There is barely anybody who would critically reflect these radical mistakes by the Greens, wanted to eliminate the internal German ministry and to rid the citizenship from GDR-originated Germans, or the Salzgitter Documentary Center, they wanted to close it where the crimes of the GDR were documented. So a lot of mistakes were there, which would be worthwhile to speak of, and this did not happen. So that's the reason why these old things pulled up should come into the limelight again. So an old idea on the new branding may succeed. And I think this discussion could not be finished, but just stopped, interrupted. So I thank very much Imre Kónya, Hubertus Knabe, and Balázs Orbán for having been with us and being with us, in fact. And now we shall have 10 minutes, and indeed 10 minutes of a coffee break. And in the next discussion, we shall make a view over the beyond the Hungarian-German horizon, and then further on, I can only confirm that Edmund Stoiber is at Bicske now, which is about 15 miles from Budapest. So a 10 minutes break.